Well, good morning, or I guess good afternoon, or good evening. Again, no, depending on where you are. I know we have folks from kind of all over the world that have joined us. We absolutely appreciate you taking the time to spend the next hour with us as we dive into more around Unity and PlayFab. This is part of a multi-part series around getting going with Unity and PlayFab and how the two work together. You can always sign up for our webinars. They're available for sign up at playfab.com/webinars. We always try to make both the slides available as well as the video, assuming we don't have any technical issues, right after the webinar. Both of those can be made available through our blog, playfab.com/blog, and you can find usually a follow-up blog post, usually the day after the webinar, or you can look for the video on our YouTube channel, and we post it up there as well. So for those of you that are attending today, I'm actually really excited as we kind of dive into some of the basics of player login. Joining us and presenting today is Marco Williams. Marco is the head of our developer tools group and is really responsible for thinking about ways that PlayFab integrates into Unity and making those available to developers, as well as the documentation and things that surround it. So without further ado, Marco, I'm going to hand it over to you. Marco?
Thanks, Tom. Hi again, my name is Marco Williams, and thank you all for joining Unity and PlayFab Player Login. Let's see. Trying to get my slide here to increment, and it is not working. There we go. So what we're going to cover today is various ways to log in with PlayFab. How to make an API call to log in, and we're going to discuss a little bit about players and the flow of authentication, and then we're going to have a brief chat about some best practices, some things that I've experienced, and possibly just general good practice of how to authenticate your player and make it a very smooth transition into your game. So this comes with a small to-do list, and most authentication requires some sort of UI for the user. So I've already pre-built that in the examples I'm going to be showing. But in general, you have a login screen or a registration screen, and if you're not prompting a user for some sort of credentials, then often you'll want a link with Facebook, or sign in with my Google and that sort of thing. So that'll all require some sort of UI. Another thing that is going to be very important is to make platform checks for what type of authentication that we're going to be doing, because PlayFab offers authentication based on iOS, Android, Steam. If you're on a PC and you have a web game, we allow you to authenticate through Congregate. We support, the PlayStation Network, and there's a lot more. So we're going to want to do some sort of platform check to kind of give us a basis for how we want to authenticate our player. So this next to-do item is make preference checks. So, and this kind of bleeds into best practice a little bit, because you don't always want to make that initial call to the server and say, is my player already registered? Sometimes you can handle that with just setting a simple preference inside of Unity. So, and I'm talking about like player prefs, or however you store your player data. So it's important to have some sort of like remember me type of feature, or be able to get the user have or make the user have a very low barrier to entry into your game. So a user wants to come in, click start and click play and start playing your game as fast as possible, and they don't want to have to worry about authenticating every single time. So this is one way that I found to make a very lightweight, easy to get into your game sort of thing by using a preference check. And then we're going to make some API login calls, and I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can do that. Lastly, this is not as much of a to-do as it is just a concept of giving the developer the control of how to authenticate into the game. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our Unity example, and let me just explain a little bit of what I have going on here. So right now this is just a background screen. This is like a splash screen, if you will, to get into your game, or really it could be anything. I mean, you could have a splash screen, and then the next level is where you're going to put your scripts for managing your authentication, however you want to do it. For this example, what I've done is I've created a script and I've put it on my background panel, and what we're going to use that for is to kind of drive everything in this particular example. So the other thing is I have a login and reg window, and this for those of you that were in our previous webinar, and you can go to the webinars page and be able to find the previous webinar that we did. But we used this login and registration screen in that previous example, and this is going back to we need some sort of UI. So when a player needs to authenticate, this is where they do it. So let's see what else I have here. So I created this thing called a PlayFab Auth Manager, and what this is going to be ultimately responsible for is handling the various conditions and the flow of a player login. And we're going to dive into the code and be able to find out what that's all about. So I have a few scripts in here, pretty much just the background panel, and that background panel is just going to kind of be my startup of the game, like I explained. And then the login and reg panel script is literally just what's driving that UI. So if they press the login button, it's going to perform an action, so on and so forth. The other thing that I have here is our PlayFab SDK, and this can be downloaded from our SDKs page on the website. And the plugins folder actually comes with the SDK. So these are packaged when you import in the SDK. These are the two folders that you're going to get. So I want to take you guys over to our documentation site real quick, our API documentation. And I've already drilled down. So I pretty much, to get there, I clicked on client, and then and the first section here is authentication. And you're going to see it's quite a lot of information here. So there's login with Android device ID, custom ID, login with an email address, login with Facebook, Google, iOS device. We have congregate, login with PlayFab. This is straight up credentials, so username and password. Login with Steam. So if you're building a Steam game, then you have a way to take your Steam user and authenticate them into PlayFab. And then we have the register PlayFab user, and this again is straight up credentials, so username, password, email, and we store that on the PlayFab servers. So, and then we have the Photon authentication token. We're not going to cover anything about Photon in this particular example, but what that particular authentication type does is allows you to use our Photon servers and authenticate as a PlayFab user, and so that that association to your player while you're using Photon. So if we look at one of these, I'm going to use login with custom ID as an example. What this has is the title ID, and title IDs. If you're somewhat new to PlayFab, I'm going to I have it in one of these other screens here. I'll bring this over. So your title ID is what you need to make any sort of PlayFab call. So I'm gonna show you how that is linked up in code, and you only have to set it once, and then your whole entire API is ready to go to make more API calls. So put that over here, and so where do we want to go next? Next, we're going to go. Let's go ahead and dive a little bit into the code. So actually, before I do that, let's talk about our flow a little bit. So what I've done here is I've kind of diagrammed out, and best practices for authentication is very interpretive. There's so much to it, and there's all these different paths that you can take, and it gets very confusing, especially when you have multiple platforms, multiple login types. Like I said, we have login with Facebook, Google, Steam, Congregate, PlayStation, etc. And you have all of these different avenues to travel for your player, and it's really good to kind of map that out and have a solid plan of attack. And when I talk about best practices, that's really what I'm talking about. I mean, it's a very interpreted subject, and here I think the best practice is to have a plan of attack and map out how you want your login flow to work. That way you can try to cover all of your bases before you begin coding. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do is check to see if the player is already previously registered, and and you can do this with a call into PlayFab if you want, and pass in the credentials or your custom ID or your device ID into some call, but it becomes very cumbersome, and this is why I suggest using player prefs, is because it becomes very cumbersome if you have to do that check against a whole bunch of different platforms, or and you don't know exactly how that player has authenticated in the first place. So you have someone coming in on a device. Let's say it's an Android device, but maybe that player also linked his Facebook account, and that was his preferred method of authentication. So now really what you want to do is authenticate that player through Facebook, not through the device. Because if they log in with a device, well, now it's not cross-platform. Now it's very specific to that operating system. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to do a check to see if the player is registered. And if the player is registered, we're going to log in by link type. And so when a player first goes through that flow, they're going to authenticate. They're going to pick whether it's Facebook, or they're going to log in with their username and password, and then we're going to save that as a preference. So the next time we come in and we check if the player's registered, it's going to say yes. We're going to issue a login by link type. Then we're going to get the link type. So we're going to know what type of authentication that the player has stated that they want to authenticate. And then we're going to perform those PlayFab calls, and then we're going to send an authentication event, authentication complete event. So going through the beginning of that flow, if they don't pass the registration check, then we're going to do a series of platform checks. Let's figure out where our player is coming from, what platform they're on, whether it's iOS or if it's a Steam game or whatnot, and we're going to cover some of this in code. then we're going to assign our recommended link type. So we're going to say, hey, you're on an iOS device, so we think that you should authenticate through iOS. And then we're going to send an event that says, hey, our platform check is complete. And so we're going to have another script that's going to look for these events. And that other script is going to put the control into the developer's hands. And by doing this, we're saying, okay, well, I've received a platform check. The recommended authentication type from this platform check is iOS or whatever. And then we're going to put that control right into the developer's hands to say, well, maybe I don't want them to use a custom ID or a credential to log in. Maybe I want them to be anonymous in the game and not have to worry about authentication, because I don't have an MMO that I'm building. I have an infinite runner game, and I don't really feel like that my player needs to authenticate. But at the same time, I want to store the statistics of the game, and I want to use all the PlayFab features, and you need a login for that. So we give you methods for authenticating anonymously, and this puts all that control right into your hands, and you make the decide. So you can, or the decision, so you can override what the recommended link type was, and then save that into their preferences, and then issue the login by link type. And again, we're going to acquire that preference that you saved, and then log our player in, and then send the authentication has complete event. And really, you want to intercept that authentication complete event and say, all right, we're in, we're ready to go, and we're going to get into our game. So let me show you kind of how I've set this up in code. And I have a lot of collapsed code here, so I'm going to just go ahead and expand all these things out. And it looks like a lot, but it really isn't. I built this this entire script in about, I want to say, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours of coding. But again, that's like trying to think things through, because you have all these conditions that you want to do. And so I'm trying to figure out what the best practice is for authentication. And like I said, it's a very interpretive process. You may be doing it differently in your games, and you're like, well, I think it should be like this. But the best practice for authentication, for me at least, is mapping it out and making sure that all your bases are covered. So. So let's see what we got here. So, I missed one. So I declared enum of link types, and this is going to specify all of my supported link types. So I've kind of matched these up a little bit to our PlayFab API. I left out a couple in here, like PlayStation Network and whatnot, but I kind of wanted a solid foundation for, like, that could be expanded on if I wanted to add authentication, so we can just put them in here in the link types. So then I have a title ID. So really, anytime you make a PlayFab call, you're going to need to set that title ID. And because I declared this as a public string, this shows up in my inspector. So if I click on my PlayFab Auth Manager, I have my title ID here, and so I can go ahead and set that. And again, I got that title ID from one of these browsers. Has it? Hold on. No. Yeah, here we go. So I got that from inside of my studio. Now, this isn't the only place that this shows up. I can drill into my studio, and I can click on settings, and then also the game title ID is here. So if you're already inside of your game manager, you can get there by going to settings, credentials. So we want to take that and we want to populate it right here in the title ID. And so what do we do with that now? So I'm gonna skip down a little bit, and you're gonna see right here when I start up. Now I could actually put this inside of the Awake, and it's probably better to do so. Depending on like the order of your other scripts. Maybe you have something that wants to make an authentication or another PlayFab call, and you may need that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that around and put that up in the awake. So what this is going to do is check to make sure that you've populated the field. So this is just a little bit of a data check, error proofing it. And then I'm going to set PlayFab settings.title ID. And that's all you have to do to really use any PlayFab call is make this setting, and now you're ready to go to make any client PlayFab call. So that's a really nice thing about our SDK and API. So let's keep moving down. So I have a test mode. This is so that I could toggle into test mode, and it'll just randomly generate a new player, so I can simulate multiple players. And that way, if I'm like choosing to log in through a custom ID or a device ID, that it will change that up a little bit for me, so that it will think it's a new device every single time, because your device ID is very unique to that particular device, which many of you probably already know that. And so you get stuck into this like chicken and the egg situation where you're trying to test out your code, and you can't test that new user scenario because it's already picked you up as a previous user. So this is a good way to have some sort of test mode to reset. So that's what I've kind of coded in here. Show debug, that's pretty simple. I'm just debugging stuff to our log. And then user account info. So user account info is a super important thing to have after you log in. I'm going to actually take a second and go to our docs here. And if I go to authentication, I thought I already had that open, but so if I go to authentication and I'm going to do a search for info. So there's this call called get account info. So after you log in, this is a really good call to do because it's going to return to you your title display name, all of the information about your user. After you authenticate, so here we go. This is where we want it to be. So it's going to return this user account info object. You already have your PlayFab ID after you log in. So, I mean, that's not the most important thing here. But what is important is that you get all of this other information about your user. You get their Facebook info, Steam info, Game Center info, title info, depending on how their accounts have been linked up. And all of this information is like centralized into this one object. It's very easy to use. So this is a great call after authentication to do. So we're going to take that information after authentication, and we're going to store this right here inside of our PlayFab Auth Manager. So I have storing this locally in here just for convenience, but you can pretty much get that at any time. And then this is just a private variable to hold a custom GUI. Good, and I use that with the test mode so that we can be able to test that new scenario over and over again. So I've kind of made this a singleton mono behavior object, and that allows me to reference the instance of this object from static functions. And then I have a series of events. Now, if I look at these, I don't know why these got all spaced out, but this is my OCD kicking in right there. Okay, so what we have is a few event delegates that will handle certain things like on platform check complete, on return player check complete, on PlayFab auth complete. So this is when your full authentication has been completed, and then on PlayFab auth error. So if our authentication throws an error, 9 times out of 10, especially if you have a username and password prompt, you want to display something to the user that says that the authentication failed. So we can receive this event and then be able to do something with it. So moving down here, I'm checking for test mode, and I'm going to assign a new GUID. These GUIDs, you'll see I'm using them in our player prefs variable. So this is really nice, because if you've already generated a GUID, then it's going to all your player preferences for that session is going to get stored in your under this key. But if we're not in test mode, it's just going to be empty, and so this will be the root of your. This will be what your player prefs key will be. It'll just be underscore whatever it is. So this is a little trick that I use. You don't have to use it that way, but it makes it easy for me to test over and over again. So here we're going to check if the player is registered. So that's what we're doing here. We're making a simple check to our player prefs, and we're just like we showed in the diagram, to see if we already have a key that the player is registered. And so if the player is not registered, then we're going to do a series of platform checks. And then, and if they are registered, we're going to determine what type of link that they had. So that's what this code here does, is we're going to determine the link type, and then we're going to fire off an event that it is a returned player, and that our returned player check has been completed. And likewise, inside of the check platform, after all the platform checks, we'll get to that in a second. After all of our platform checks are complete, then we're going to fire off a platform check complete event as well. So before we get into the platform checks and the rest of all of this code, I want to take a second and take a look at our login and registration example that we kind of showed in the last webinar. And the reason for this is that this shows a very simple how to log in, and let's kind of, we're already diving in really deep into the code, but let's just give a simple example of how to log in and register. So this login and registration panel script is on our game object, so for our panel. So here's our login and reg window, and if I enable that, that's this window here. And then I have a script, and then I have a whole bunch of our fields, our form fields and our objects inside of our login form, and I have those all assigned in the metadata so that I can reference them in code. And then here, so here, this is exactly what we were seeing. I have some bindings to handle when the login button is clicked or if the register button is clicked, and then and now when a login button is clicked, this is how every single PlayFab call works. And I went over this in our last webinar, but it's super important to know the format, because this is literally the foundation of every single API call in PlayFab. And what you do is you define a request, and we have a ton of request objects. So if I was to actually come up here and just do like var request equals new, and then you're going to see all of these requests here, accept trade request. I wonder if I just type request here, if with a bunch of, no, it doesn't. Okay. So anyways, every single API call has some sort of request, and that request holds all the data that you're going to be sending across. So here we're building our login request using login with PlayFab request, and it wants our title ID, which we've set in our PlayFab Manager in the awake, so it should already be available. And then we're going to pass our username. This is the data that's coming from our form in our username field, and as well we're going to set our password. Then we're going to take this login request and we're going to pass it into the login with PlayFab. And what that's going to return is two things. It's going to either kick off a callback for a result, and if you get a result, that means you successfully logged in. Or it's going to return some sort of an error. So if it returns an error, then you're going to get back in the callback an error object that you can do something with, like display a message saying, your password was invalid, etc. So once we make this request, we're going to get the result back, and I'm going to take that result and I'm going to pass it right into this login register success. So I created a little function down here that handles the scenario for both logging in and register. And you may wonder why I did that, and that is because whether you're logging in or you're registering, both of those paths end with you being logged in upon success. So both of those are going to get the same login response object with your PlayFab ID. So if I explore the result here, result, I spelled it wrong, result.PlayFab ID, and then there's also result.session ticket. Actually, if I just hold on the result, you can see all the things that come back. Let's do that. So we have PlayFab ID. Custom data is very interesting, and we're not going to cover it a lot here. But essentially, you could override this whole entire method, and you'll see there's an override for an object of custom data. So you can actually pass in like a JSON string of custom data, and that will carry over. Or you can pass an object, and that will carry over into the result set for you. So this is very handy further down the line in our PlayFab API calls when you have like a inventory item that you're purchasing, and then you went through the purchase process, and you needed to really have more information about the item that you were purchasing because that item had a whole bunch of stats and information, and you don't want to have to do another lookup into your catalog. Kind of rambling a little bit, but it's a very, very powerful, handy feature to use this custom data. So back to what I was saying. So the other thing that is really important is this newly created. So you can tell if this user was a newly created user, if this is his very first time, or if he's a returning user. All right, so yeah, this is, do I have it? What am I doing? Okay. So this is like pretty much picture perfect how to use PlayFab to log in. And the fantastic, since all of our API calls work the exact same way, if I wanted to log in with a custom ID, I would just create a new login with custom ID request equals new login with custom ID request, and then here I'm going to pass it a few values, create account. That basically specifies whether or not you want to create an account if it doesn't exist. So that will do that. So if I'll just say true, we want to set the title ID, which is in PlayFab settings title ID, and then we also want to set a custom ID. Now, custom IDs are very funny. It's such a powerful feature. This is a new API that we added fairly recently, within the last 4 to 6 months, and you can use this. This custom ID is completely arbitrary. The only requirement is that it's unique. So you could set a GUID here. You could set a system info device unique identifier, which is something that Unity provides, which will identify your machine. But you can use this login with custom ID for a number of uses, and it's a very, very powerful feature. So moving on, now I'm going to take this custom ID request and I'm going to send it over to PlayFab. So I'm going to use the PlayFab client API login with custom ID. And then I'm going to pass my login with custom ID request. And then I'm going to get a result back. And this is just a lambda expression. You know, it's a delegate that or a delegate callback, if you will. So then here's error. And so we're going to get a result back here, and then we can do something with the result. So result will be available. This will have all that same information. So all of our authentication results are exactly the same result. You're going to get that back. And you can see it's available here in the PlayFab client models login result. And you can see all of the properties. And you can actually get to that on our API documentation on the website. You can pull up the PlayFab login result. You can see every thing that is returned and a description of what that information is. So, and then in the error, we have the same thing. And you're going to get the error details, the HTTP code. You're going to get an error message, and you can use that information to pass that back to the client in a friendly way. Okay, so that's all I'm going to cover in here. This particular example is not actually going to, I mean, we can log in with it, but the purpose is more to show the flow of example, or the flow of authentication rather than actually performing the action, although it does work. So we're going to jump back over into our Auth Manager, and I just want to pause real quick and ask, does anybody have any specific questions about anything I'm showing? Am I going too fast?
So I haven't seen any questions come in. We had some people obviously asking about where they could get the slides and the videos and things, but if people have questions, please go let us know. If you have any questions around the flow as well, we do have somebody who just raised their hands. If you could, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a chat window. Excuse me, a question window. Sorry, wrong thing. Question window. There we go. All right. So Marco, it would be nice to know a bit more about how to handle logins across multiple devices.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a great question, and so that goes back to the user flow diagram that I showed. So I'm going to try to find the window. So when we're talking about multiple devices, so actually let me clarify your question a little bit with another question. So when you say multiple devices, do you mean on the same platform? So if you had 2 Android phones and you wanted to log in on one phone with your account, and then you wanted to log in on the other phone with the same account. Is that what you mean by multiple devices?
So if he could just either send in the question, I think he was kind of getting at, I think he wants to do all of it, I think would be the short answer.
Okay, so I'm going to cover both scenarios.
Okay.
So there's that one scenario where you have a user that has, let's say, 2 Android phones, but they're on the same platform. And then you also have the scenario where, my wife has an iPhone, I have an Android, and she's playing a game that I like, and my battery's dead, and I want to go over there and play on her phone, right? So that's also cross-platform. And to solve that problem, you need to do some sort of linking with like Facebook or some other authentication. So there's a couple ways that we offer this. So you can, one, have them create a PlayFab user account, which would be this right here. That would require a username, a password, and an email address, and they can sign up for an account, and that account is actually good for across any any type of game that you put in. So that login will work on, let's say you have 3 games inside of PlayFab, that will work, that login will, authentication will work across your titles. So the other way is to create an account using their linking with Facebook or linking with a third-party provider, let's just say. So you could do Facebook or Google. We also have Congregate, but I think Congregate is more towards web. But so I guess the correct answer would be go with Facebook or Google authentication, and that allows them to log in with a different credential. So I can go over to my wife's phone, I can log her out, and then you log in, and in that login flow, this is part of the whole developer chooses how to authenticate, right? So we want to put some logic in there that says, okay, when I logged out, I'm going to put up a screen, and that screen is going to prompt them with how they want to log back in. And we can have a button that says log in with your Facebook account, or log in with, you know, PlayFab, or log in with Google, and you can have that like little user prompt to the for the player.
Great.
Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
How does
Yeah, so how does unlinked device ID, iOS or Android work? Do I need to be logged in on the account with the device ID and linked device ID in order for the unlinked to work, or can I unlink the device ID from any account?
So yeah, you do need to have that device linked. So I'm not going to be covering too much about the actual like linking with Facebook, because there's a whole bunch of Facebook SDK stuff that you have to do to just be able to log in with Facebook in the first place. So I thought that was going to be a little too much to cover in an hour. But to answer your question, yes. So you would put in the Facebook SDK into your game. You would log in with Facebook. You would get a token back from Facebook, and then you would use. I'll actually show you here. Link. So you would link this Facebook account, okay? So you would already be authenticated. So let's say you authenticated with an iOS device. So then you would link that device with your Facebook account, and this makes that binding connection. So if you wanted to unlink that device, you could put a button in your like settings or something like that inside of your game that says unlink this device. As soon as you do that, it will make the call unlink device. So we have this unlink Facebook account. So we would make this unlink Facebook account call, and that would unlink them from Facebook. And so using these methods, right, you can link and unlink devices from Facebook completely freely, and as many times as you want. There's no restriction. So you can link and unlink and have different people authenticate and link their Facebook to it. And then when they log out, you would unlink it from that device, and so on and so forth. And you know, this could be a whole webinar just on this particular topic, because it's very complex. It's a complex workflow to do. And you know, Tom, we may want to consider doing a like how to link and unlink, best practice of linking and unlinking with Facebook.
I think it's a great idea. All right, and then one other question. Two. Let's see. Can a user delete his or her account for a specific title ID without losing the PlayFab account?
So the answer to that is that you never really delete a user account. As a matter of fact, if I go into my players here, we don't actually allow you to delete any particular user. Now you can ban a user, but you can see that there's no delete feature of PlayFab. So once they've created a user inside of PlayFab, they always have a user. And in order to let's say make it so that player can't use your service anymore, you can issue a ban. And that like let's say he's abusing your service or whatnot, you could use bans for that. The other thing is that once they already have a PlayFab account here, that doesn't mean that they're locked into this particular account. So let's say that you were using username and password to authenticate. They could create 20 usernames and passwords. They just log out, and then it prompts them to register again. They choose the register, and then they could re-register over and over again with different PlayFab accounts. So that's another way to allow like multiple logins, having people that have multiple accounts using PlayFab. But there's no real delete functionality.
And I think for now, Marco, I think that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on, and we're gonna take a deep dive into checking the platform checks, and then we're gonna see how to handle all of this information from the developer's point of view. And we're running short on time, so I'm gonna run over this really quick. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to collapse up, log into PlayFab, and I'm going to expand out my platform detection. So what you're going to see here is that I'm using Unity's preprocessor directives here to determine what type of platform that we're on. And from this, we're going to derive a recommended link type. So, so the first thing I'm doing here is I'm checking to see if we're on standalone, if we're on a web player, if we're inside of Unity editor. Standalone is gonna cover like Mac, PC, and Linux. So we have all of our PC platforms. Then because you're probably going to have some sort of Steam manager or something to manage your Steam account. Same with your congregate. You're going to have something that manages that authentication using their SDKs. So you're probably going to have something. So this name would change to whatever particular one you have. But what this is doing is it's a little bit of a reflection to see if that assembly actually exists. So if you do have the Steam manager present, then we're going to say, hey, we're recommending that that you use a Steam link type. So we're doing these checks there, and then if all else fails, we're going to roll back over to custom ID. So custom ID is awesome for anonymous login on PC, Mac, and Linux because you can just specify that device ID that system info gives you. And then you can use that to always identify that device as being the same every time. And again, you can always change this with linking with Facebook or changing. You have full customization over how you choose your players to authenticate, and we're going to go over that. So the next thing is I'm checking for iOS. I'm setting the link type. Android, Xbox One. I do have some PlayStation checks, and you'll notice that because I didn't define those inside of my link types, I'm just setting them to custom for right now. Same with all of these other types here. I'm just setting that to custom. So now we have a recommended link type, and I'm going to send out an event that says on platform check complete. Now, what handles that? So this goes back to what I was saying. So right now, my splash screen is going to handle my determining what type of authentication that I want to do. So I have this script on my background splash panel, and I'm binding to a couple of these different things. So when this object wakes up, I'm binding to on platform check complete, and then I'm also binding to on return player check complete, which we'll cover briefly. And we're sending the link type, so it's going to receive that. So if I take a look at this on platform check complete, what comes back is the recommended link type for this user. So I can handle this PlayFab login type based on their link type. And so I want to do that same thing for both the return user and the platform check. So here is where developer control comes into play. So right now, if it comes, I just have one condition in here, and I'm trying to keep this example very simple. But right now, when a player comes in and goes through my platform detection, I'm going to look at what type of link type that is, and I'm going to say, well, if they recommend that the link type is a PlayFab, then what we're going to do is show the login screen, right? And then otherwise, we're just going to log in by whatever recommended link type it suggested. And then I have a little bit of a delay to actually show the login screen, because otherwise you'll never see the splash screen, because this happens so fast in the background. So let's actually take a look and see how that works. Right, so I have this disabled. That's good. My background's disabled, so don't want that. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm just going to push play. What's going to happen is it doesn't know to use a PlayFab login, so it's using whatever the recommended authentication type was, which was custom. And so I have some custom code, and what this is telling me that it logged in and it did the account info receipt. So I'm going to just take a look at that really quick. Inside of our auth manager, I'm going to collapse the platform check, and I'm just going to look at the login by link type. So this login to player, accept a link type. I'm checking for different types of link types here, and then based on the link type, I'm doing specific things. So like for Android, I'm getting the device ID from JNI, from the Android level, and then I'm going to pass that device ID, the device model, all the information I can get, and I'm just telling it to create the account if one doesn't exist. Then I'm doing the same thing for iOS. Facebook and is a little more tricky, because when we call that, we need to have that ticket. So we're going to have to do a Facebook, authentication call through their SDK first. We're going to get back that auth ticket, and then we're going to pass it here. So you'll see I'm like storing this in player prefs underneath this PlayFab access token. So when I get that back, then I would call this on return of that. But that goes back to developer control of how we want to handle authentication. So doing the same type of stuff for Google, and then if we come all the way down to the bottom, I'm just going to finish up here. What I'm doing here is I'm taking exactly what I showed you before. I'm taking that unique device identifier, and I'm passing it into my login with custom ID along with my title ID, and I'm saying if this account doesn't exist, then create it. And I have some error handling as well as a handle login result. That handle login result, now I've already logged in. Now I want to go out and get that account info that I said was so valuable. So we're going to make a call, and here's the message that you were seeing, is that account info was created successfully, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to store it back into this object so I can access it at any time from anywhere in my game. So that's kind of how that's working. So let's go back to developer control real quick. And it looks like I'm going to run a couple minutes over, but bear with me, I'm almost done. So let's say that I did not want it to pick the default suggested link type. Let's say I know for a fact I want my players to log in with a PlayFab username and password. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to override that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put a condition in. And I said, hey, if this says login with custom, no, I don't want that. I'm going to override this link type, and I'm going to specify I want this to specifically pop my login screen for my players to authenticate. So that's what we're going to do here. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And so now when we run this example, it's not going to authenticate with a custom ID. It's going to wait a second and pop up my authentication. So I can use, my username, which I don't even know if I have a username and password here. Let's take a look. Here, no, that's my bank account. I should close that. I don't even know why that's up. Let's see here. Where is it? Where did the dashboard go? It's okay. I'm just going to log in again. PlayFab, log in. Oh, I was already logged in. Okay, so let's see. Go to players, and then we're going to. We have a couple test users here. So this was my test user, and so my username was test, and maybe my password was test. I can't remember. I have to watch the video, but let's just try it. So test, and then maybe it was test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I kind of usually use. Yeah, maybe not. Oh, so it logged in, but I don't have any output, right? So we may want to do that real quick just to show something on the screen. Let's see, debug.log, login successfully, go to your game. All right, so let's do that real quick. And let's just ensure that the login is working. Test, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, login. Yeah, so there we have, login is fully working. So that's all I have for you guys today. I really appreciate you guys following along, and you guys had some fantastic questions. I'm going to not only make the I'm going to make the flow chart that I created also available for you guys to expand on and come up with your own flows and have a solid understanding. Like I said, the best practice here for authentication is knowing all the paths ahead of time, because even what I've created here is not covering all of the bases. This was a very down and dirty, quick authentication to handle a bunch of scenarios, but in reality, there are lots of conditions. What happens when someone removes the game from their phone and then reinstalls it? Well, now all their player prefs have been cleared, and so you have to handle for those conditions as well. So it's super important. The best practice here is to plan, diagram out all of your possible paths ahead of time, and then hit the code and code in those conditions. So thanks again for listening. We have a whole rest of the series coming up, and I'm excited to see you guys again.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marco. We appreciate it, and we appreciate everyone who's joined us. We're kind of right at the top of the hour. We do hope that you will join us for the next webinar, getting started with Unity and PlayFab in-app purchases, which is November 5th. As always, please go to playfab.com/webinars, and you can sign up for any of the webinars that we have available, and we always hope that you'll join us. Once again, thank you, Marco, and thank you, everyone, for joining.